Welcome to Disinformation Breakdown. I'm Nyan Gavino, and today we're exploring the evolving landscape of mis and disinformation in gaming culture. From misrepresentations of players to misunderstandings of gaming's impact, to disconnects between developers and consumers, there's a lot we should unpack. Gaming journalism has a lot of room for improvement. Players often feel misrepresented in the news and online discussions. This disconnect can lead to harmful stereotypes and misconceptions about the gaming community. Let's start by breaking down some common gaming misconceptions that, in truth, are actually misinformation. Concept number 1. The media doesn't quite understand the impact video games have on consumers. This lack of understanding is a very important and crucial issue. Bridging the gap between gamers and journalists could lead to more accurate and nuanced reporting, benefiting both the media and the gaming community as a whole. When there's a disconnect between the two, there's bound to be division and hate for the other side, like we currently see. One major source of misinformation comes from long-held myths about video games. An article by MIT professor Henry Jenkins titled Reality Bites, 8 Myths About Video Games Debunked, tackles a bunch of these misconceptions head-on. This takes us to concept number 2. The availability of video games has led to an epidemic of youth violence. This claim has been a talking point for decades. Jenkins notes that federal crime statistics show that the juvenile violent crime was actually at a 30-year low at the time of the claim. In fact, research indicates that individuals committing violent crimes typically consume less media than the average person. It's crucial to remember that while some young offenders played games, the majority of young gamers do not engage in antisocial behavior and often participate in social activity with other gamers. It is a myth that video games train players to be violent, similar to military training. David Grossman, a former military psychologist, suggests this link. Video games are often discussed by politicians in a similar light, often further worsening the issue of misinformation and skewed perspectives. In August 2019, a Facebook post went viral claiming that California Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said mass shootings don't happen in Japan because they don't have video games there. This claim was clearly false. McCarthy never said this and turned video games into a tool to spread disinformation about the Republican politician. As a comparison, however, that same year, after shootings in Ohio and Texas, President Trump suggested that violent video games are partly to blame for this violence, despite a lack of real, hard evidence. This claim was incorrect, and only served to further the gap in understanding between gamers and non-gamers. Concept number 3. Gamers are shut-ins and prefer to isolate themselves to play more video games. A Statista report revealed that 56% of players actually engage in gaming with friends. Many popular titles today are multiplayer, building connections and teamwork with others. To quote Dr. Jenkins, "In this way, there are really 2 games taking place simultaneously. One, the explicit conflict and combat on the screen. The other, the implicit cooperation and comradeship between the players. 2 players may be fighting to death on screen and growing closer as friends off screen. Social expectations are reaffirmed through the social contract governing play, even as they are symbolically cast aside within the transgressive fantasies represented on screen. This highlights the social aspect of gaming, where competition on screen can lead to friendships off screen. Video games create spaces for interaction, collaboration, and camaraderie, challenging the narrative of isolation that is often pushed." Concept number 4. Another part of the disconnect between gamers and coverage is the stereotype of the average gamer. Many assume that the average gamer is a teenage boy, but in the modern day that simply isn't true. Caitlin Thomas is a CSUN student who falls into that underreported category.
There's always been a bit of a stigma against girls who have gaming as a hobby, consistent or not. When I was younger, I was heavily into gaming through PC, console, and my Nintendo DS. The majority of games I would play centered around fashion, music, and other kid-friendly games. Some of the more notable ones included Mario Bros. And Nintendogs. However, as I got older, gaming lost that charm it once had, or at least through the consoles mentioned prior. I began to transition to mobile gaming, where I indulged in classics like Five Nights at Freddy's, Injustice, and Candy Crush, where I eventually reached levels over 3,000. Playing these brought me a lot of fun times though. Some would argue that mobile gaming is not the equivalent to running similar programs through other consoles. Say if an individual didn't have access to a computer or a PlayStation, but spent their free time indulging in games that the app stores would have to offer, why should they be considered any less of a gamer?
So where do we go from here? The responsibility falls on journalists to close the gaps in reporting and combat misinformation in the gaming space. By fostering better understanding among developers, gamers, and journalists, we can elevate the discourse around gaming and improve the quality of journalism. I think by bridging this gap, we can also in turn have gamers that better understand the developers of the games they play, creating a better relationship between the producers and consumers. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Till next time.